fighting effectively for America's freedoms. And doing it while maintaining a good attitude. That's the topic of today's Bold and Blunt, and I'm your host, Cheryl Chumley, giving you a Christian conservative look at today's news, politics, culture, and events. And speaking of culture, how about the culture in America right now? Does it bring you down? Does it offend your Christian sensibilities? It does mine. And before I get into all that, I want to quickly mention, if you like Bold and Blunt, you can get Bold and Blunt at edify.app, the online platform for faith-based podcasts, at washingtontimes.com, and wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, what have you. So if you're a Christian right now in America and surveilling the political and cultural landscape, you gotta be thinking to yourself, it's revelation time. Right? I mean, never mind that Israel is now a state as one check mark to end times in the Bible. And never mind now that the internet has actually enabled the gospel to be spread all around the world, in all corners of the earth, in the farthest of corners of the world. Just look at how evil is being flipped for good and good is being flipped for evil. And look at what is happening within our own borders, never mind around the world, within our own supposedly free constitutional borders. Religious liberty is being persecuted in this country at an alarming rate. And you know, when the churches fall, when belief in God falls, that is an open door, a wide open door for the communists, the Marxists, the godless, the forces used by the demons running around the world right now on behalf of Satan to rein in individual liberties, and in America especially to rein in and cripple and crumble God-given liberties. So look at what's taking place in America right now, and you got to be asking yourself, geez, are these end times? And I don't have an answer for that, but really nobody does, because the Bible says nobody knows the time or date, not even the Son, meaning not even Jesus. That particular moment in time is reserved for God's knowledge only. We're on a need-to-know basis here in humanity, and I guess we just don't need to know. We're supposed to live as if Jesus in the second coming and revelation could happen at any time. We're supposed to shine our light on a daily basis and not sit at home with nails chattering against teeth, frightened in the corner about the next assault on our individual freedoms, as granted by a creator, not by government, by the way, and that is called American exceptionalism. So look around right now at what's going on in America. Look at Joe Biden and the media coverage, which is about as in-depth and substantial as the next ice cream cone stop that this president makes. They really don't dig deep. There was a time when Afghanistan and the botched withdrawal and the needless deaths of American heroes and the lives that were put in peril and jeopardy, lives that are still in peril and jeopardy that we don't even talk about anymore because we've moved past that media cycle. But there was a time in America where even Democrats, some, and mainstream media members, some, found cause to criticize this White House, this administration, this presidency, this Austin Floyd leadership of defense and so forth. And those days have passed, and Joe Biden won the silence of the media once again. He won his water carriers back in the press. So to the average American who doesn't really pay attention to news except what they get on the Twitter feed from their far leftist media outlets and friends, America is doing great, except for those dastardly, deplorable Republicans, specifically the Trump-supporting Republicans, the Make America Great Again, the America First racist types. That's what ails America, according to these people. Well, the thing is, America's been on this downslide for a little while now, really sped up under Barack Obama. And then we had Trump, the great disruptor in chief, come in and set path straight in America. But he didn't have time to complete his work. And really, he barely had time to get much done because he was so busy, well, in the White House fighting not just Democrats, not just nefarious players from overseas governments, not just the world governments, but get this, his own party leaders. Remember, Trump, there was a time in Trump's administration where it was a clean sweep of Republicans, White House, Senate, House, and that's when you heard things like, we don't have enough votes. We don't have enough votes to meet the 60 vote threshold. So Republicans turned around and fought Donald Trump and tried to jump into bed with Democrats again. And Trump, to his credit, kept outing them, kept fighting them until the deep state drummed up some fabricated Russia collusion and so forth and so on. We don't have to go down that rabbit hole again because we lived it for 3 years and it came up short. And now we're facing the same sort of attacks if you're in the Donald Trump camp, if you're supporting Donald Trump and his new announced run for the White House. Here come more attacks. Here comes New York finding the Trump organization guilty of this. And here comes Democrats with their January 6th committee hearings finding Trump himself guilty of that. And now you've got the people in the Republican Party out there who want to run against Trump in 2024 and kind of, sort of starting to float out whispers of where Trump went wrong, people who are on Trump's side, but they've got to distance themselves from Trump because they themselves want to hold that high White House office. And the only way to do it is to start hinting that Trump is not as good as he once was for America and will not be good for America in 2024, and that Republicans, conservatives, have to start looking at a different candidate to fill the White House shoes. All that being said, when you look at what's taking place in America, when you look at the economy, when you look at the disrespect of America on the world stage, when you look at how China is just completely mocking us right now and taking full advantage of the feckless administration, when you look at inflation and supply chain, even though we don't know what supply chain means, as Joe Biden says, we're too stupid to understand that phrase, but I'm going to pretend like I do, and I'm going to throw that phrase out there anyhow. When you look at supply chain issues, when you look at the state of America's public school systems and how we are churning out one graduating class after another to hate America and love socialism, which is to say love communism and Marxism, there's really no difference. And then you look at how the nation as a whole, from adults down to youth, are steadily turning more and more secular, steadily turning farther and farther away from their churches. And you think, wow, how can God-given rights survive in an atmosphere that doesn't recognize God? So we're in perilous times. Yes, we are. And it's very difficult to maintain a good attitude whelched. I want to be English and say whelched. Whilst. Whelched. Maybe I should stick with while we're all doing the good patriotic duty and doing the good patriotic fight and taking the good patriotic fight to the far left. It's really hard to keep spirits high, right? So lucky for you, because I have a guest today. She is known as a happy warrior, and she really is a warrior who is happy, which baffles me because I don't understand how you can be both at the same time. In my view, either I'm a warrior or I'm happy, but it's really hard to bring those two things together. Well, Monica Crowley does it best. And you know her from Fox News, Newsmax. You know her from her time in the Trump administration. You know her from a previous time as Washington Times opinion editor. She's a frequent pundit, media guest. She is a writer, and she has her own podcast now, highly successful, highly, highly addictive. You must go check it out. It's called the Monica Crowley Podcast. Write that down if you can't remember it. Again, Monica Crowley Podcast. And she's here today to talk about the state of the nation and teach us all, hopefully, how to be happy in the fight. Monica, thank you so much for being on Bold and Blunt. I really appreciate your time.
Oh, Cheryl, it's such a pleasure and a joy to be with you. Thank you for having me.
I know. I'm so excited to have you today. So I want, there is so much to talk about that's going on. And I know we only have a few minutes, but I'm just curious, what's your experience on Twitter nowadays? Isn't it kind of fun to actually be on the social media platform now?
I must say, we didn't know what we were missing, Cheryl, before Elon Musk, right? Like, we'd all be on Twitter, and we'd all send out these tweets, and you'd get some traction and some engagement, and you thought, okay, well, this is the way it is. This is how we roll on Twitter.
Right.
But now that Elon Musk has come in and he has lifted, I think, pretty much all of these suppression algorithms, the shadow banning and so on, maybe some people are still subjected to some of that. But I don't know about you, but my account has been completely liberated, and it is now so much fun to be on Twitter because you're actually getting organic traction and organic engagement that you never had before. So I always had a pretty substantial account, and so I would send out a tweet, and maybe with a good, clever tweet, I might get like 1,000 likes, maybe, over the course of 12 hours or something. Now, within 30 minutes, I've got 1,000 likes. It's not every tweet, but I mean, the tweets are just taking off because he has lifted everything, and it is so extraordinary. And again, we didn't know what we were missing, but now it's so clear what the tech oligarchs at Twitter were doing in terms of suppressing people, silencing people, suspending people at the request of political campaigns and political parties. Completely outrageous, and there needs to be accountability.
There does. And, I'm kind of keying in on what you said about we didn't know what we were missing because that's true. We got sort of used to this downtrodden state on Twitter for conservative and even Christian thoughts and so forth. And it reminds me of when Trump came into office, we kind of didn't know what we were missing in terms of individual God-given liberties. And Trump just kept hammering away at those ideals, make America great again, America first. And we're reluctant now to go back to the pre-Trump days.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And I'm really glad you raised that point, Cheryl, because it's a critical one. And last week I was actually in Washington speaking off the record to about 30 members of Congress, all conservatives and Republicans. But I was making the point that the base has now completely changed. The Republican base will never again reach for a Mitt Romney, a Jeb Bush, a John McCain. That is not happening. It's like the old saying of you can take the girl off the farm and bring her to the big city and she's never going back to the farm.
Right.
So we are never going back to the farm. There will never be another establishment Republican presidential candidate, at least not in the near future. And the same thing is true now for big tech. Now that we have been to the big city and we have seen what the truth is and how these platforms should behave, there's no going back to the previous life.
I don't know if you can give any kind of insights on that private meeting with Republicans, but here's my question. There are still too many Republicans in the party who disagree with Trump and don't want anything to do with Trump and actively seek to drive all types of Trump influence from the Republican Party. And you're right, we're never going to go back. But do you see that sort of realization taking root in Washington, D.C. among the GOP?
Yeah. And, I often say on my own podcast, Cheryl, that, I reflect on something that President Nixon once said to me. I worked with him during the last years of his life, and it was such a blessing to work with him. I learned so much. One of the things he said back in the mid-1990s when I was there, it was my very first job, he said, you know what, Monica, I have more respect for a true believing communist than I do for an American Democrat, because at least the communists will tell you exactly who they are, what they believe, and what they intend to do, whereas the American Democrat will dress it all up. They have the same intent, and belief system, but they'll dress it up and pretend. Well, I would put a modern day spin on that and say I have actually more respect now for most American Democrats than I do for the establishment Republicans, because at least the Democrats tell you, hey, we're in the middle of a Marxist revolution. Take it or leave it. We'll crush you if you decide that you want to oppose this in any way. Whereas the Republican establishment, Mitch McConnell, and the rest of that crew in D.C., they will tell you that they're for limited government, fiscal responsibility, freedom of speech, but they don't believe it, and they don't act it, and they don't defend it and fight for it. So they're lying to your faces, and that to me is more dangerous than what the Democrats are doing, because the Republican establishment will give you a good line to try to attract your money and your votes, but then they, on the other hand, they turn around and they join with the Democrats in destroying the country. So I have no time for the GOP-E, as it's called, whatsoever. Trump came in, he was a great disruptor, both for the country, but also for the Republican Party and the entire corrupt status quo. And that is why they needed to destroy him. That is why they continue to try to destroy this man, because he represents an existential threat to their absolute grip on power and their entire corrupt gravy train.
It's infuriating to watch how many Republicans are so willing to side with the Democrats in their Trump derangement syndrome tactics, because it's not as if Republicans as a party weren't put on notice about conservatives in America, their dissatisfaction with how representatives were going to Capitol Hill and jumping into bed with the Democrats. We had the whole Tea Party movement, the Tea Party movement that Mitch McConnell, remember, wanted to crush. But it's not as if conservatives in America haven't been sounding the alarms on the party and its disloyalty to conservative principles for years now.
Yes, that is exactly right. I mean, we have been blowing the whistle on this for a long time. And actually, if you think back a little bit, Cheryl, what's interesting in terms of the arc of history and the arc of this movement, it really began under my previous boss when he was president. I was not born when he was president, worked with him in his last years. But it actually began in 1968 with the election of Richard Nixon, because he was able, as an outsider, even though he had been vice president and a U.S. senator, he was still positioned as an outsider from California. And so he was able to begin this entire realignment that continues to this day, which is attracting, making sure that he was representing the forgotten man and woman, and then attracting disaffected Democrats and independents to the Republican candidate and the Republican ticket. So they began as Nixon Democrats, and then you fast forward a number of years, and that same movement then became the Reagan Democrats, and then you fast forward again, and it becomes the Tea Party movement, and you fast forward from that, and it is the MAGA movement. So, Cheryl, it is all the same movement of the same Americans who just want our foundational principles to be restored: individual liberty, economic freedom, and capitalism, strong military, sovereign nation. That's all we want. So it is, over the last 50 years, it is the same movement, but because there are more of us than them in the regime, they need to try to break us up and disperse us. So every time we get together in big numbers, whether it's the Tea Party or the America First movement, MAGA rallies, and so on, it is a huge threat to them, because they know that when we feel our own power in this way and our power in numbers, they know that their days are numbered. That is why they have done their best to smear and destroy the Tea Party as a bunch of bigots and racists and so on. Same thing with the MAGA movement. They have not allowed Donald Trump a moment's worth of peace since he came down the elevator. They have to destroy it if their corrupt gravy train is going to continue.
And let me give you my quick thoughts, and I'd love to have your response on this. To tail on what you just said, and they're winning. The left, in my viewpoint, is winning right now. If you look at the globalism that is seeping into America, with the simultaneous propaganda that's being fed into our youth in the public school system, and many in America coming out of schools hating America, hating capitalism, and hating the free market and all that the founding fathers stand for. And then, to me, this is the most important, you add to it the growing secularism of America. America, to me, is facing perilous times, and the left is winning. How do you see that?
Yes. I mean, these are very dark times. You can't sugarcoat it. I mean, I am a happy warrior.
You are happy.
Absolutely, and we will never give up. We will fight until our last breath for America and everything it stands for. But it is true that these are dark times because our side, for decades, has not been paying attention to what the left is doing.
Right.
I've said repeatedly, I told these members of Congress the same thing. I gave them a little history lesson, that all of this began as a KGB operation in the 1930s. And then World War II happened. It went a little bit on pause, but not much. But this all came out of the Kremlin as a grand project to destroy America from within. And after World War II in the 1950s, they put it on full blast. And the communists decided that the best way to destroy this country from within was grabbing control of the key pillars of American society and life. And so they did. They infiltrated the country, and they began infiltrating government. So McCarthy was right. They infiltrated and grabbed control of academia, the news media, and the culture, movies, television, music. You go back to the 1940s, Hollywood was cranking out pro-U.S. films, anti-Hitler films, anti-Stalin films. Then in the 1950s, you had John Wayne. The entire thing began to change in the 1950s because the communists came in and grabbed control over those institutions. And now the leftist control is everywhere, in every nook and cranny of life, not just those main pillars, but also big tech, big pharma, and then you layer on top of that the transnational organizations that are all about the Great Reset, a one-world government with them as the vanguard at the top, and you are a serf. So the World Economic Forum, the World Health Organization, you have all of these very dark forces all working hand in glove to crush freedom, because their ultimate goal is to flip the United States into basically a Marxist, economic Marxism, cultural Marxism. That's what all of this is. CRT, the drag shows for children, the gender dysphoria. This is all cultural and economic Marxism, and everybody better wake up to it because the hour is very late in this country.
The hour is late, and look at who we have as the gate guard in the White House. And just briefly, I know our time grows tight, but briefly count the number of ways that come to the top of your head that Joe Biden is a danger to America, specifically American liberties.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, Joe Biden doesn't really know what planet he's on most of the time. So he has been installed in the presidency the way Rishi Sunak, the British Prime Minister, has been installed. He wasn't elected. He's installed by these dark forces, by the globalist movement, the globalist Marxist movement, which is very active here. Joe Biden poses a fundamental and existential threat to American freedom, and it's because he is a puppet for these forces, Cheryl. So the economic Marxism that he's inflicting on this country, we're all suffering the fallout of that. Skyrocketing inflation, sky-high gas prices, a supply chain crisis. You name it, in every direction you've got economic pain and suffering, and they do not care because it's all part of the grand plan. You know, when people talk about, well, why isn't Joe Biden exploiting U.S. energy reserves? The United States is sitting on more energy reserves than any other country on the face of the earth, including Saudi Arabia and Russia. Why isn't he getting our oil and natural gas out of the ground into America's gas tanks, but also on the world market to lower the price? He won't do it. Why? Because the energy sector is the biggest lever available to them to fundamentally transform this country. They don't really care about the environment or climate change. Those are all just the superficial reasons they give you for this. They could give a flying wit about any of that. This is about the fundamental transformation of the nation. So there's huge economic damage being done, and of course, huge social and cultural damage being done as well with the gender dysphoria and the CRT and all of the abuse and exploitation of our children. Communists throughout history have understood you get them young. So whether it was the Soviet Union, whether it's China in this very day, it doesn't matter. Any communist system, get them young. Get them young and indoctrinated, and they will be with you forever. So these are just a number of threats that we face, many in this country, coming from this regime of not just Biden, but everybody around him who are all on the same page of re-engineering this country. It is a very dangerous moment.
So just to finish on a hopefully happy note, because you are the happy warrior, and I do spend a lot of my time when I do public speeches and so forth, or I get stumped on media shows and what have you. I think, what would Monica do? So let me ask you this now: what's the happy note? What would you like to see Americans do right now to turn back the tide?
Well, first of all, thank you for that very sweet compliment.
It's true.
That is just so lovely. It means the world to me, so thank you. Look, whenever I speak to audiences, I always try to end on a happy note, too, and try to give people some sense of optimism, but also some tools. And I would say this in terms of what we all can do. I always advise people to get involved locally. You know, we spend a lot of time at the Washington Times and on my podcast focused on what is going on internationally and also what is going on at the national level here. And all of that is critical and important, and we should be focused on that. But don't lose sight of what is going on in your own backyard. I encourage everybody to get involved in their local communities because the left has certainly done that now for decades. They've got decades on us in terms of trying to transform this country. This has been going on since the 1930s. So for 90 years, the communists have really been doing a real number on America. So this is going to be a long-term project, and it is a war for the future. So the first thing is understand it is a war, understand it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of time. So be realistic about that. The other thing is get involved locally because just look at George Soros. Soros has spent the last number of decades, probably about, 15, 20 years, maybe 2 decades, pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into local races, into local DAs races, into local mayors races, not just in the big cities like San Fran or New York and D.C., but also in smaller, medium-sized cities, smaller cities. Why? Because that's how you control America at the local level. All politics is local. It's what Edmund Burke once called our little platoons, communities, churches, town halls or city halls. So the left has understood this very well, and it's time that we fought back at the local level. So to the extent that you can, maybe you want to run for school board. Soros has been all over our school boards to get CRT and all this other communist jazz in there. Maybe you want to run for school board, or maybe if you don't want to run, you find great candidates to support and go out and campaign, knock doors. Those are the kinds of things locally that we all should be doing. The other tool that I want to just leave everybody with is cultural. So our late great friend Andrew Breitbart once wisely said that politics is downstream from culture. So while we're all focused on the House and the White House, and all of those offices are important, of course, but politics is like a symptom of the culture. So I encourage everybody to really support conservative content like your podcast right here, Cheryl. My podcast, please listen to it. It's called the Monica Crowley Podcast. But also, when you see conservative entertainers putting out documentaries or albums, like my friend Kathy Lee Gifford has a beautiful Christian book out and a beautiful album out right now. Please go seek out those things because you need to send a message to Hollywood that this is the kind of content that matters to us, and we will support it with our money. That's what gets their attention. So if you want to change both politics, you start at the local level. That's something all of us can do. I'm certainly doing it. And also the culture by supporting cultural content that will capture the attention of the real power brokers, and they would give them pause to say, maybe we should take a look at putting out some more anti-woke stuff or conservative content. So those are some small things that can empower each one of us to really begin to put a dent in what seems overwhelming. But I want to leave everybody with a great sense of optimism that this country and our Constitution are so resilient. It's been under assault now for decades, and we're still standing. So as long as there are great patriots like you and me and everybody listening today, and we really put our shoulder to the grindstone, we will be able to rescue America.
That's perfect. That's perfect. The way you counter the darkness is not flee it, but just shine your light brighter. And you certainly gave some pragmatic and easy to put into place ideas for listeners to take today. Monica Crowley, you are America's great patriot. I love listening to you speak. I love everything you do, reading your books and so forth. And I hope everybody subscribes to your podcast today. What's the title again? Monica Crowley Podcast?
Yes, thank you. It's called Monica Crowley Podcast, which isn't particularly creative, but it does get to the point, Cheryl. So please go check it out wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Google, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever. And I do it 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, so you'll always have a fresh show. And I'm really proud of the show I'm putting out. It's something where we have no time to bleed in America. You got to rip the Band-Aid off and tell it like it is. And I know you do that on this show, and I thank you so much for having me.
Oh,
and I certainly do it on my show as well.
It's an honor to have you, and thank you for taking on a podcast, adding something else to your very busy life fighting for America freedoms. Monica Crowley, I appreciate you being on Bold and Blunt, and I appreciate you.
Well, thank you so much, Cheryl. I really appreciate you and your friendship as well, and you keep up the fight, too.
Thank you. One of her book titles is called What the Bleep Just Happened, The Happy Warrior's Guide to the Great American Comeback. It came out a while back, but no doubt it's still pertinent to today's. And she's also written about Nixon. Nixon in Winter was the title of her book on her former boss. So check out her podcast. Of course, you see her all the time, Fox News, Newsmax TV, and elsewhere. And like she said, take on the mantle, pick up the cross, get in the fight, go local, because that's where you will have immediate influence. And what's more, you'll be able to see the immediate results of your fight. If you like Bold and Blunt, you can get Bold and Blunt at edify.app. That is the online platform for faith-based podcasts. You can also get Bold and Blunt at washingtontimes.com. Just go there, scroll to the newsletter section, click on it, and find my name. Sign up for my 3 times a week newsletters that come out at the Washington Times, containing all my commentaries, giving you the bullet points you need to fight the far left. But also within this newsletter will be my twice weekly Tuesday and Thursdays Bold and Blunt podcast. You don't want to miss all the great guests I have. Guests like Monica Crowley, someone I know you agree is one of America's great iconic fighters for freedom. I appreciate your support. Tune in next time, and in the meanwhile, stay blunt, stay bold.